Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. I know this means the world to us at Belmont Books and to our wonderful authors as well. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Alrighty. My name is Olivia, and I'm a bookseller for Belmont Books. For those of you who don't know, Belmont Books is an independently owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts, and we've been bringing books to the community since 2017. Before we begin, I just want to let you know we have a number of awesome virtual events coming up. On Wednesday, February 24th, we are joined by Nancy Johnson and Jenna Bloom to celebrate Nancy's new book, The Kindest Lie. And on Tuesday, March 2nd, we are hosting Larry Olmsted in conversation with Tom Bedell to discuss Larry's new book, Fans. You can register for these and all of our other events, the same place you registered for tonight's at belmontbooks.com. And that is also where you can purchase tonight's books, Landslide and Little Matches. So I want this to feel as much like a book party as possible. So feel free to hang out in the chat, talk to each other, ask questions. Just make sure that your chat is set to panelists and attendees so you can all get to know each other there. All right, and any questions that you ask, we will answer after the discussion. So I want to introduce to you guys Susan Conley and Maryanne O'Hara. Susan is the author of 4 previous books, including Elsie Come Home. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the Paris Review, the Virginia Quarterly Review, the Harvard Review, the New England Review, and Plowshares. She has received multiple fellowships from the McDowell Colony, as well as from Breadloaf Writers Conference, the Maine Arts Commission, and the Massachusetts Arts Council. She has won the Maine Literary Award and the Maine Award for Publishing Excellence. She is the founder of The Telling Room, a youth creative center in Portland, Maine, where she lives and teaches on the faculty of the Stone Coast Writing Program. Maryanne O'Hara is the author of Cascade, a novel, and Little Matches, a memoir of grief and light, which will be published by Harper One on April 20th, 2021, so yay! It is inspired by 9livesnotes.com, a blog that Maryanne kept while her daughter Caitlin was waiting for a lung transplant. Since Caitlin's passing, she has also been certified by the University of Vermont's Larmor College of Medicine as an end-of-life doula so that she may better speak to the state of end-of-life care in our culture. With that, I'll turn it over to you, our wonderful readers. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, Olivia. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Maryanne.
Hi, Susan. It's funny not to be able to see everybody, but I know you're out there, and thank you so much for coming. And thank you to Susan for writing a wonderful book, and thank you to Belmont Books for hosting this wonderful event. Susan and I are old friends, so we are trying to make this festive, even though we're separated by 2 hours right now. I just want to say that I was looking at my bookshelf today, and I was just thinking of how proud I am of this woman. She has done so much, and this is just in the publishing world. And today we celebrate Landslide. And I wonder if you can introduce it a little bit, and then we're going to watch a really great book trailer video.
Thank you, Maryanne. Thank you so much. It's so fun to do this. We've been thinking about this event for a good while. Yeah. And thank you everyone for coming. I'm here in Portland, Maine. And this book of mine, Landslide, is set in Maine. It's set in coastal Maine. And it features a family living on a tiny island off the mid-coast. Lots of trouble ensues. It's a question about what is a family and how does a mother stay connected to her sons. It's a question of commercial fishing in Maine. And I think that's probably a pretty good setup before we look at this book trailer. That's kind of fun. The book trailer was made by a really wonderful filmmaker friend of mine. And just think that Fleetwood Mac's Landslide's playing the whole time. We couldn't obviously get the copyright, but just imagine that it's playing the whole time.
It's wonderful.
Okay, take it away, Olivia. I think it doesn't have volume. Oops. I don't know if Olivia can.
Yeah.
It's in a challenging register for me, so I'm almost crowing while I sing. And I feel for a moment like Stevie Nicks is a close friend, like she knows me. I tell the wolves, could they please let me listen to the whole thing? Because Sam, the younger one, has a bad habit of changing the station. I tell the wolves I was raised on Stevie Nicks. Mom, he says in his deadpan, I already know about you growing up on Stevie Nicks. Every time I turn on the radio, it's Stevie the Good Witch of the West Nicks. The thing is, Mom, I don't want to grow up on Fleetwood Mac like you did. I can't tell if the hair is a joke or a really bad fashion statement that involves hardly ever washing it. But I just grin at him and move my head to the beat because at least he's speaking. Sometimes my son's silence in the car is flammable. He's 16, gangly with poking collarbones like little car door handles. He wants to be a professional basketball player, but will settle for rock musician. His face has grown long and gaunt, so he doesn't look like himself, but the person he's in the process of becoming. I tell myself it's a beautiful face. It's important to tell myself that many things about teenage boys are beautiful, so I don't panic. I love this song and the boys in this car being forced to listen to this song. I turned up really loud, the way I used to when I was a different person and did not have two wolves. That's pretty cheesy, Mom. Mom, the voice. Mom, please. Charlie's trying to sound like he and I are the adults in the car. He's our moral police, 17 going on something like 33. He has my husband's dark hair. I'm trying not to think about my husband. Tall and lanky with steady blue eyes, my loner with 1,000 friends. Kit has left me on our island to fish almost every week since I married him. He'd been gone 3 months before the accident, and I think the boys and I have missed him so much we cannot say. The song on the radio is about a woman who climbs a mountain at the end of a love affair and sees her reflection in the snow-covered hills and becomes less afraid. For many months, I've wanted to be less afraid. I'm not allowed to talk to the boys about how much I miss him. I'm not allowed to talk to the boys about my dread or my worry or any of my emotions, really. This isn't because the boys aren't emotional. It's just that no outward expression of emotion is sanctioned in this phase of wolf development. I tell them,
this whole Fleetwood Mac album is so good. Never forget it.
never. Never, he says, such a funny boy. Never. And changes the station. But I've already won the afternoon because he's still talking.
So well done.
Thank you.
It's so well done. And I love also that it's the very opening of the book where you have so skillfully, in your writerly way, set everything up for us. So there's so much going on and there's so much at stake. And we know that this woman, in the title, Landslide, just knowing the song and bringing ourselves into what we know about it, that she's going on a journey, and it's a journey of her own identity. And these boys, oh my God, the poignancy of that little blonde baby morphing into that tall, tall being who doesn't want to emote. It's so painfully true. And I mean, you have 2 boys, so you know boys, and you nailed the boys, absolutely nailed the boys. I had 4 brothers, you nail boys. But I know they're not your boys. And I love how you created these people. And I think you have 2 boys and you're living with that. And you created 2 more and you lived with those 2 more for a couple of years. And what was that like with your real boys and these boys? And Sam is he's a complicated character.
Yeah, he is. It's a great case of like truth and fiction really like diverging. You know, I teach a lot and I teach a lot of nonfiction and fiction. I write both. And I was so aware, Maryanne, that I wanted to keep those wolves in Landslide separate from the 2 wolves that were living in my house.
Right.
That's not to say I didn't learn a lot about I learned how to speak boy from my boys. My boys are 20 and 18 now, which I cannot believe. Maryanne's known them their whole lives, really. Yeah.
Before birth.
And, God, that's crazy. And you know, they inspired Sam and Charlie. My boys inspired Sam and Charlie. And I got like clues, obviously, about comic timing. So the thing about speaking boy for all the mothers out there and fathers, whether you had a boy or not, like there's so much inference, right, in subtext and comic timing and layers, so many layers. And that was probably one of my very biggest hopes for the novel, was to unpack the layers and to show the vulnerability.
Well, you really do. And it's interesting to see the 2 of them, one really growing up and the other one really stuck because he's had a really traumatic experience. And he's also just a different kind of kid, isn't really into school, is into music. With parenting, I mean, obviously that's a big theme here. And Jillian is really having a hard time, and she's adrift. Her husband is in another country and he almost lost his life. How hard was that to imagine?
So I grew up in coastal Maine in this town, not this town exactly, right? I made a fictitious town, but this town is like a celebration of all the fishing villages I know. And I grew up very near one. And I spent a lot of time in Maine towns like Sewell and Harwich, made up names of towns in Landslide. It wasn't hard to imagine Kit injured at all, because my whole life I saw the trawlers going out to sea. And my whole life, because I grew up on the water in Maine, you have this incredibly healthy respect for the ocean in Maine. So do we all do, I think, in Massachusetts as well, particularly those of us on the coast. You know, it's this, you can romanticize it, but it's also incredibly dangerous work, right? Anytime you're out on the water. And I was really aware of that, like trying to conjure up, like, it sounds cliche to say real Maine, but real ocean life. You know, sometimes the ocean's your friend, sometimes it's your enemy. Like the weather is always needing to be contended with.
Yeah, what I really loved, I read a first draft of this book, everybody.
You
and
did.
I loved it. What?
Yeah, it was like 2 years ago, wasn't it?
It was 2 years ago, almost exactly. And I loved it so much. And what I loved when I reread it this past week was that you had kept all the wonderful stuff, and then you had really deepened parts that really were enriched by the deepening. And one of them was making Jillian a documentary filmmaker. So she becomes the observer of this changing way of life, which is so powerful and so universal too. It's not just Maine that it's happening to, it's happening to our whole planet, right? And I loved that you really expanded on the changing, dying fishing industry. It's so powerful. There's this one Goodreads review. I just was reading different reviews, and I just love this because it speaks to the universality of this book. Random reader. I can already tell you that Landslide by Susan Conley will end up on my best books of 2021 list. Everything about her latest story resonated with me. I know nothing about living on an island or what it's like to be married to a fisherman in a small Maine village. But all that was window dressing on what it's like to be the mother of teenage boys in a marriage facing strains. These things I know. And I've seen on Instagram people like copying little pieces of the book saying, I feel seen. And I think we all feel that way so much with this book. Whether or not we've been parents or whether or not we're married, there's something for everybody in this book, I think. And anyway, I don't want to keep blabbing, but what do you have to say about that?
Well, thank you. I'm feeling very like that was a gift to be read that review. I don't actually read Goodreads reviews.
I wouldn't read my own, but I
Yeah,
can read
that was wonderful. Thank you. That was my treat for the night. I did just recently do an event with a woman novelist who has boys, and I didn't know this, but she had read the book. I didn't, and then she reached out and she asked if I would do this event with her, and she basically said, we had to talk about this book because you were in my like kitchen. You knew me. Like I was Jill.
Yeah.
And that was like, I think that was the best reader sort of experience I could imagine and hope for. So yeah, again, boys, I think hundreds of boys have come in and out of my house over the last 20 years. And I think of them as wolves running in a pack. I've learned so much about boys. They don't, they really are so communal, at least the ones in my house. So they want the pack around. And then they're like really big hearted about the pack. And, I got to play with Wolf, right? Because you think of it as sort of menacing, maybe, or feral, but then it's also like an incredibly smart animal, right?
Yeah.
Devoted. So I was playing with all these things. And then, like you said, Maryanne, I was playing with taking the metaphor of Landslide and putting it on Changing Maine. So taking the Stevie Nicks song, my favorite Fleetwood Mac song that I grew up on, and like I wanted to celebrate the nostalgia of the 70s, right?
Mhm.
And then I got to use that great word as a frame for so many changes all over the country. I picked this village in Maine. I could have picked so many places, right? And then like that landslide word, it just keeps, it's kind of amazing. It like really starts to work across the board for a lot of things in the book by accident in a way.
I know but I had a writing teacher who once said, you give yourself gifts to yourself and you don't realize it. And that is that's an example of that. And speaking of the whole Changing Maine part, can you read one of my favorite scenes? Because I think it speaks to a lot of it. And it's on page 64.
Okay.
And remember, everyone, that Jill is a documentary filmmaker.
Okay. Oh yeah, this is fun because the book's only been out 3 weeks today. So I'm still reading new places, new passages. I haven't read this. Okay. So she's just showed her film for the first time and it's a film set in the mill town where she grew up, and it features her father. And it's a very, tired town now. The mill has closed. So we did the first screening of the film in Portland, and a man found me in the lobby of the theater afterward and told me he'd recently moved to Portland because of all the good food. Then he asked where I came from. He wore a black leather jacket and had spiky gray hair that made him look like the older version of Sting. I told him I came from Harwich. You're from Harwich, he said, which he would have known if he'd read the credits at the end where I thanked the people I grew up with in Harwich. He shook his head. It's amazing to me that you come from a town like Harwich and have made such a good film. I said, neither Harwich nor I has been insulted that well in a long time. He didn't seem to hear me. He said he and his wife had been driving around the country with their dogs for months, looking for the place to live that had the best energy. They chose Maine, he said, because it hadn't been ruined yet and it felt safe. I wasn't sure what he meant. We're running out of good places in America, he said, and ran his hand through the hair. Montana ruined, too many people. Idaho ruined. California and Seattle done. But I still get the right energy in Maine. There's all this new money coming in. I wanted to tell him that almost no one I know can pay their property taxes and that most people here are just holding on. And I'll stop there.
Yeah. I really like that part because it's so real, and I know it could apply to any number of jackasses anywhere in the country in places that are being gentrified. But I also feel like there's a little bit of jackass in me too. You know, I'm part of that. I mean, my grandfather, whole family came from Maine, but really I'm not a Mainer. And I'm a person who is really happy that there's a boutique hotel in Portland now and good restaurants. And so, you know, it's not really a question. It's not really a statement. It's a throw it out there. What change is kind of inevitable, right? So what do you do about it? And what kind of feedback are you getting from the real fishermen, the fisher people out there? I know you had a Working Maine magazine kind of interview.
Yep. So it's funny. So I love everything you're talking about. These two things, this idea of like, you're from Harwich. I can't believe you did that film. This is an example for all the writers out there of like me taking things directly from my life and airlifting them into my novel. And this is what a lot of novelists do. So then you tweak it and you get this emotional truth. So for me, that actually happened to me at a library event. I probably last summer, or no, probably 2 summers ago. And it was, you know, actually quite a bit north in Maine, and this, like, to the word, you know, they referenced my town and said, how could you have ever written a novel like this? We came from that town. This was my last novel, Elsie Come Home. And it was just gold. I wrote it right down. You know, I went and wrote it right down. And then the other thing, like, I also sat with a couple that had just moved here, and they said, like, to the word, they were like, Montana ruined, you know, California done. And when they got to the word safe, that Maine was safe, that's where I was like really interested, because I don't think they really knew what they meant, or they meant a lot of things. But Maryanne, to your point, I've been talking about this issue. It's about modesty, right? And it's about humility, and it's about authenticity. I mean, of course, people are going to move around. I think it's this preciousness maybe that Maine doesn't really need, and that my job in this book, in my opinion, was to show the chasm between the fishermen who are teetering, and then like the idea that, but Maine's so great because there's so much great food. It's, you know, there's, the more we can do to, you know, shine the light on that, I think the better. You know.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, Maine is such a big state, and Southern Maine is such a small part of it, and Portland's even smaller. And, you know, I've certainly been up in parts of Maine with you and seen those fishermen who are going out there. And I think you wrote really realistically and painfully well about how dire it is for them financially. And that's something that's happening as we speak, right? The quotas and the fish not coming in. I've seen it at your parents' place. The fish aren't there anymore, and now there are eagles, and everything's changing before our eyes.
Yeah, I did a number of interviews, no surprise, for the book, traveled around the state. The heartening thing was the message was the same from all the fishermen I talked to, which was that they were in for life. And that was really what I also wanted to look at. What would happen if you couldn't do the thing you most loved, the thing that you were so deeply passionate about and felt you were born to do, which was fish. I mean, Kit, the husband in this book, I think he's 4th generation fishing. I'm 4th generation Maine, and I know that there are people in my family that, like, they need to be in Maine. They can't leave Maine. And Kit can't leave Maine. Jillian has left Maine. She's one of these people that got out, which is like a thing in Maine across all class, you know, it's not like you have to be wealthy to get out. Like, people will need to leave this state, but often they're drawn back. There's like a homing device. And I do want to say that in my research, I learned about a lot of hope for the commercial fishing industry here in some ways, like a lot of innovation around aquaculture and a lot of rebounding of species, not all the species, but there's a lot of commitment in the state to not losing the industry.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's such an important industry. It's the identity in so many ways. Well, that's hopeful to hear and heartening. And I thought it was interesting too, what you just said and what you allude to in the book, that Maine is a place where people either know they're going to leave, or they know they're not going to leave. And I know you can't say that about all states for sure. And I found that interesting. And also there was a part in the book that struck me when I first read it. And again, where Jillian says, I didn't realize that making fun of Maine was a thing. And it is, you know, and I guess I knew that, but I hadn't really thought about it. And it seems cruel now that, you know, I've thought about it. And
yeah, you just brought up something, Maryanne, that I hadn't thought of in a while. And that is another moment taken right out of my life. So it may sound not true when I say it's not an autobiographical novel, but it's really not. But yet there's another emotional truth. Like when I went to college in Vermont, there were a lot of jokes about, did I use an outhouse in Maine? And I was like, what is this joke? I don't even understand this joke. Like, and I didn't know it was a thing. And I hadn't thought of that in a really long time. But when I put Jillian in art school in Portland, came right back to me. Oh, people are going to make fun of her for being from Maine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, Vermont, come on.
Not that far.
not that different. Yeah, it's so complicated. I think you just did a fabulous job showing all of it. And it's just one very rich layer that just runs throughout this whole book. But let's get back to the kids.
Okay.
Because, they really do. I mean, she's a mother and she is so deep into mothering at this fraught time. They're turning into adults and so much can go wrong. Something did go wrong with her son's friend. It's a scary time. And now her husband's almost died. And she's just trying to hold it all together on a freezing cold island with no heat in November. I mean, you added it, you really raised the stakes here. You did a really great job. And then the boys, I just think I'd love for you to just read one more part on page 105. They're having a school meeting because Sam hasn't been getting to school. And maybe if you can, then she stares at Sam. Just read that part. I think it just is a really good presentation of all the conflicting emotions of parenting right here.
Okay. Yeah, this was fun to write, I have to say. This was fun to write. So yeah, he's getting called out. He hasn't been in school a lot, and it's their parent teacher conference, and Jillian had no idea.
None.
And Mrs. Curtis, she's a nice woman, but she's kind of had it with Sam. And she says, he talks over me and under me, Mrs. Archer. I can't seem to get him to quiet down. Then she stares at Sam for a moment through her reading glasses, which are attached to a long brass chain that hangs around her neck. I really thought he'd be my leader. She shakes her head. I find this the saddest part because Mrs. Curtis uses the past tense as if we've already lost Sam to the band in Burlington, Vermont. I want to tell him that each time he skips school, he lies to me. Mrs. Curtis says that she'd like to see a better system in our family for getting Sam to school. She's relying on Kit and me to make this work. We've got some things going on at home, I try to tell her. She stands and nods, the kind of nod that implies the Archers always have things going on at home. Then she thanks us for coming in. When we're out in the hall of lockers, Sam says, "What's truancy, Mom?" I can't breathe very well. I want to yell things at him and go on a little rant. But whenever I try yelling at him, he looks amused, which masks the genuine hurt I think he feels that anyone would ever dare yell at him in the first place. So then I'm up against willful ignorance and righteous indignation. I don't answer except to say he's walking home after school. I'm not coming to get him. That's impossible, Mom. We live on an island, remember? Well, you'll have to figure that out then. And then the chapter ends.
Yeah, and you know, and that's the tail end of a scene where you are so angry for the mom at Sam, and yet the teacher doesn't really understand the whole complicated situation, and you sort of understand her championing of Sam a little bit, of the moms, and so it's just so complicated and heartrending. And then a couple of pages later, I'm just laughing because this same kid is like practically crying because she's not making the pasta he wants. And then this was just like such a favorite line, because I can just remember my brothers being like this. The boys sit down. They're not listening to me anymore. They're eating like they've never seen pasta before. And I need to grow, Sam says, almost to himself. He takes another big bite. I really, really need to grow, like today. And I love it. Like, I laughed out loud. It's so true. Boys are funny. They're so funny. I mean, all kids are funny, but they're funny. And you did a really great job with them. And Sam especially it's just heartrending, because I won't even go into, what's happened with Sam for people who haven't read the book, but you do a really good job presenting his complicated situation. But now I want to ask you, you've written China, you've written Paris. You could have written Maine a long time ago. Why now? Why did you write this book?
Yeah, I think we can't write the stories that, are calling to us until we're ready to write them. And I started knowing I had a Maine novel in me probably 5 years ago, but it's like there's a cue in our imagination. And I had to get this China expat woman on a mountain, Elsie Come Home story out of my system, because I'd written a memoir about living in China. That was my first book. And it was a really delightful book to write. It took some detours that I hadn't expected. And I didn't get to say some of the things I wanted to say. So I had to write the Elsie Come Home book. And interestingly, that was about two little girls. And in the very end of Elsie Come Home, they are from Maine and they return to Maine. And I remember when I wrote the chapters where they're in Maine, it came so easily. And I felt so comfortable. And I thought, God, Susan, why don't you write a novel where you actually know the damn place instead of making up Paris and China. And it was such a relief. So I also am 53 now. I published my first book when I was 40. I didn't have enough to say yet. I didn't have, purchase on things that I wanted to say about Maine and about my Maine. And then, Maine has changed so much that now I really can sort of look back. And it's a love letter to Maine, this book. I mean, love letter to Fleetwood Mac. And we have a joke in the state that you can't go a day without listening to Fleetwood Mac on the radio. Like,
really?
If you turn on the radio, you will hear Fleetwood Mac. And so, like, Sam is not joking when he says, like, I don't want to grow up in Maine on Stevie Nicks like you do or did, because
that is so funny. And my husband, Nick, my husband, always says that everyone in Maine drives a Subaru. So the Subarus are playing Fleetwood Mac. I didn't realize that was a Fleetwood
Mac. Nick. This book is for Nick. The Subaru.
Nick is watching right now, by the way.
Hi, Nick.
He was sending me text messages saying, we're doing a great job.
We love you, Nick.
Yes. He's down on Cape Cod, actually, another changing place.
Cool. Yeah.
I mean, we're all seeing it, and this planet is rapidly changing. We're all seeing that, and it's.
Yeah, I did a talk last week with a woman who has written a beautiful memoir / sort of personal history called Milltown, and it's very much about the Milltown she grew up in Maine, and it's very much of an environmentalist book or environmental book. It's called Milltown.
What's her name?
Carrie Arsenal.
Oh,
yes,
yeah. Okay.
It's a great book, and she's a friend of mine, and we realized that so much of what Landslide is doing in terms of fishing is what Milltown was doing with the mill. Like, you could pick your industry, really.
Yes, definitely.
Pick your industry. But she really pleased me. I thought it was a great moment for me when she really felt she understood this book is slyly like a cautionary climate change book. I mean, yes, it's fishing, but it's also it's about how to sustain the fishing industry, but it also always has an eye on the warming waters. And it's showing that the storms are getting so much worse, the seas are getting so much higher, and that was my greatest hope, was that this would be also a book that would be part of the conversation about warming waters here. And I'm going to be doing a number of events actually in the state around that issue.
I'm
I love
happy
it.
to hear that.
Yeah. I love it when fiction can cross over, you know.
Definitely, because as we all know, fiction is truth and many truths. And yes, Jillian is made up, but like you said, there's so much emotional truth in that. And in all the characters we create. But you're such a skillful writer, and you read. I mean, you're a teacher. You just, I don't know how you do it really. You're amazing. And you started the telling room, and tell them what happened the other day. Come on, just tell them.
Oh yeah, so the Creative Writing Youth Center that I started with two dear friends in Portland had a guest visitor named Barack Obama last week. And that was pretty amazing. You know, Maryanne, it's making me realize I've been thinking about, so she asked me to read, you asked me to read that little scene where Jillian's coming out of the theater after screening the film. And I didn't finish reading it, but what happens in the part I didn't read is the man says, why are there all these students of color, all these kids of color here in Maine? And then she goes on to explain that, you know, there are a lot of them because Maine is or Portland in particular is a sort of unofficial sanctuary city. And
Yeah.
That's a lot of the work that we do at the Telling Room. And that was really on my mind. Like this book is not just examining class, it's examining race. And, you know, the generations of fishermen that are here and the fishing villages are still like wildly primarily white. But this Maine is changing. We have a lot of international people here now. And you know, a lot of people talk about cultural heritage in Maine, and that fishing is obviously a cultural heritage. So how do we stay open and keep opening as a state? And then also, how do we preserve our cultural history or heritage around something like fishing, which we all know it's an incredible domino effect, right? I mean, we know it. Like, the reason why I really was called to write this book, besides my deep like need to read a book that honored and celebrated and had fun with teenage boys, because I wasn't finding them. I felt like they weren't out there. I've now Knopf recently had me do an essay on boy mom books.
Yeah.
Actually, but it took me a while. So I had this deep curiosity and need to like show the inner life of teenage boys. And then I also had been going by the fishing village where I grew up, and you've seen it. And you used to know every fisherman that lived in every house.
Yeah.
And you saw the fleet of trawlers. And now it's a tourist village. And not that hasn't happened in every village in Maine, but it happened in the one I live near. And it was
in a lot of them.
Right? Some of them have held on incredibly well, and I don't think they'll ever change. They're so smart about it, but that one changed so much. And now, you know, that heritage is gone, that history is gone. And you know, when I talk to the fishermen, nobody blames anybody. You got to pay your taxes, and you've got to have retirement. And so you sell, you know, if you can't support yourself and you can't keep your boat in the water, and you sell, and then you move out, and then someone, you know, moves in. But and the other thing I think that I wanted to shine a light on, Maryanne, was like that idea of waterfront access. So not just like, do you have a house? Because you may not have a house by the water if you ever did, but actually just like getting access to the water is a big issue for people that work on the water in Maine. And a lot of folks don't realize that. So that comes up in the book.
Yeah. And I have seen that with a friend who lives a little bit south of you. She bought the last working lobster wharf as a house, and but she lets them use it. And but it's complicated. At one point in time, you know, that was just a working little harbor. I think I'm supposed to be looking to see if there are questions.
Oh yeah, I bet we have questions.
I saw one. Robin says, can you talk about your writing process, Susan, selecting the scenes to tell the story you wanted to tell? I have 2 boys and a girl, and your depth of insight in your writing resonates powerfully.
Oh, thank you, Robin, and thank you for coming. So process. Yeah, I'd love to talk about process. I am I usually have one of these in my hand or a pencil. I think through writing. So even while Maryanne's talking a little bit, I might jot a thought down. That's how and so I create notebooks of my first drafts.
Mhm.
And Maryanne, I want to hear your process after. So then I take the notebooks to the computer, and then it's like iterations of that. I don't seem to think my best on the actual computer. I need to have what I call like scaffolding, or
Yeah.
paint on the wall in my notebooks. And then there's a lot of drafting. What I sometimes say, I teach in the grad program here in Portland, the Stone Coast MFA program. And for my grad students, I talk about writing as stamina or
Mhm.
endurance. So I feel like I finish a draft, I hand it off to my beloved editor. I've been lucky. This is my 4th book with her at Knopf. So we kind of have a shorthand. And she's an incredible editor. She makes a lot of edits. And while that's happening, I'm like regaining my strength, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just like an endurance thing of how far you can take your scenes. And then it comes back. And if you're smart and you've gotten an exhale and you've rejuvenated, then you go in and you take it further. So I'll close by saying that some of the end material of this book, where things really get quite intense, that was near the end of the whole writing process. Like, I'm not someone who wrote the ending at the beginning because I wasn't ready yet. I didn't know my characters enough. And then they surprised me. They were in like bigger trouble and they said things that surprised me.
Yeah, and I saw that shift between the 2 versions I saw as well, which was really good.
So we have to say that Maryanne has this beautiful memoir coming out in April, Little Matches. And I've been so honored to get to watch that book come to life and evolve. And I know you haven't started doing events yet, so it's thrilling to just start, like, put your feet in the water with me.
I know, I haven't done events in so long. It's weird to think my novel came out so long ago, but it did.
But tell me, or tell us, just if you could, just the sort of framework of your process, Maryanne.
Well, this was the first time I ever wrote the personal, not fiction. And I was so it was a different animal. And I was also living inside of very deep grief. And I just had to set a timer every day and just get a certain amount done. And then when the timer went off, I could just like lie on the floor and do nothing. And you were my salvation because I sent you a chapter every Monday.
Yep.
And one day, I think we were flying back from Europe or something, and I didn't send you my pages. And the next day I was like, hey, you've got to give me hell. Don't just let me get away with it. And I
get mad at me.
Needed that. But I needed that. I mean, so I can't, my process is different usually for stories, for a novel. But I think I just put my head down and wrote Little Matches. And
I think that's great. I mean, it's for certain people also, that's going to work for them, and actually, Maryanne, it reminds me, no matter what, people have to be super stubborn about their writing time. And that's something we should, like, I have to be so disciplined about it. Like, I have to say, I am not leaving this desk for the next 4 hours. So while I may not have a timer, I think you're pointing to this idea where you have to create urgency and, like, you have to raise the stakes a little. Like, I will do this until the timer goes. It can't be, and I have a lot of people in my life who want to write, but they don't fully value the writing enough yet. Yeah. But sometimes if I get my hands on them, they do.
Well, you're very good at it. Anyone who has you as a mentor or teacher is very lucky. But yeah. All right. So do we have any other questions here?
Thank you for looking at the chat.
So Kathy, who owns Belmont Books, says our cafe manager at the bookstore is from Mexico, Maine, the town in Milltown.
Oh my goodness.
Well,
So
yeah.
cool. Yeah.
And
Very
and then Susan Bernhardt said, I love that about the draw of certain places, how outsiders decide some places romantic and desirable. As a Montanan living in Massachusetts who loves Maine, I feel seen. See, people are feeling so seen. I love it. And Nicole Bernier, hi, Nicole. It's like there are layers of foreign languages talking over and past one another. Boy and comic timing and mom and radio, Maine insiders and outsiders, fishing folk and tourists, lots of ships passing, so poignant. So true.
Oh, so Maryanne and I are like, you know, we're not, well, actually she's much more tech savvy than me, but Olivia just said, look under the Q&A. So there were 2 questions in there. You'd think I would know this after 3 weeks, but I can't really.
Okay, see, I haven't, this is my first time, I've been on Zoom, of course. I haven't
So
like
there's
done
a couple
that.
of good questions there.
Yeah, do you want to read them?
Or no, yeah, you want to read it?
Sure. Do you get any pushback from people who live in the interior of Maine that the fishing industry in coastal Maine is such a draw and so much the identity of Maine? Well, that and the moose.
Yeah, you know, it's funny when I did that. Thank you for that question. When I did that talk with Carrie Arsenal last week, we got laughing because, and I mean, it wasn't really funny, but she said when they were growing up in their mill town, they thought that those of us on the coast were really wealthy, right?
Right.
Coast, and then of course the fishing community was, fighting for everything it got, and it certainly did not feel wealthy. And we're really making a difference here between fishing and lobstering. I just want to make that really clear. We call them fishermen, but lobstering has had a lot of really good years, right, in Maine, and that's a really different story than commercial fishing. But there was a heyday for commercial fishing, obviously, in the 70s and into the 80s. Yeah, I don't know. I think that I think it's a good question. All I'll say is my primary goal and hope was to do right by the fishing world that I was rendering. And I've been pleased to hear from the powers that be, the stakeholders that matter to me, that it's passing the sniff test. So, and I'll also say this, that I feel lucky that I got to write the story. Stories come to you and you get to write them because I'm from Maine. My family's all from Maine. So I felt like I could write the story. And this is the weird thing, the way life gives us stories that we're allowed to write or not write. And I'll also say this, I always had a fantasy that I would write a memoir about raising, 2 teenage wolves so I could show everyone how to speak boy. I can never, ever write that memoir. That memoir is so verboten. That is not allowed. Like,
no way, not a chance.
No way. You can't write that. So I was lucky to be able to do that in my novel. Yeah.
What do the boys think of this?
They haven't read it yet. Oh, that's funny. Kathy Crowley. Hi, Kathy. She said, did writing these 2 boys make you see your own sons and parenting experience differently? I think that's such a good question. I think it made me calmer, and it has only allowed me to bring more humor. My boys are pretty funny, and Sam and Charlie make me laugh too. And also Jillian and Kit are going through such a hard time on this island, this little island, that, I feel really lucky that, knock on wood, everyone has their health in my house. And the loss that Sam has suffered, he suffers it early in the book. He loses a friend. That's a loss that, when I did some research, is the kind of thing that happens actually a lot to teenagers. In this case, someone like falls off a bridge. This happens a lot. There's a lot of bridges in Maine, and not to get too writerly again, but that trauma sits over the whole book, and it needed to. right? Like,
Mhm.
yes, Sam gets in trouble, he smokes pot, and he doesn't go to school, but that isn't really what's at stake, right? It's
Exactly.
really trauma. And can Jill reach him? Can mothers or fathers somehow crack through that veneer right in those key teenage years where you really risk losing the child? And that was like the biggest question I think I was asking was, will Jill lose him, like emotionally, physically, and how do we not lose our kids? I really wanted to like put a lot of
And I
pressure on.
have such chills knowing that people grapple with this, and it can be so heart-wrenching,
Right.
so
Right.
hard for people. It's such a hard time for kids, and it's so hard to parent them during these years.
Yeah, I mean, there's a moment in the book where Jillian is making a choice. She's kind of called to make a choice. She's either going to stay in the hospital with her husband who needs her, or she's going to drive 8 hours home from Nova Scotia, because she knows that the longer she's away, the more her boys, particularly Sam, is going to veer off the tracks. And I have to say it, I brought my emotional truth to that. Like,
Mhm.
we all know, even if it's not our children, like people in our larger family, like when someone's in trouble, we have a homing device for it. We have an instinct for it. And then it's like, we're distracted because we know we really should go pay
Right.
attention. And that word, I think she says something like, I knew, there's a line where she talks about how she has to keep paying attention.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. If she even like blinks, she can lose him. And he's always a puzzle that she's trying to solve for, and that rang really true to me too. Like, she'd think she'd solved it. Like, I think I figured him out. And then like, no, he'd go and change on her again. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And right in the beginning, that very first page, you say, he's the person he's becoming, and
Right.
she's becoming, and it's like Michelle Obama's book. We are all always becoming something other, even though we are still essentially ourselves. But kids, especially, growing, their brain changing, becoming different people from that adorable little blonde cherub in the video.
Yeah.
Those
No,
actors were great, by the way. They were
yes.
wonderful.
They're very well known wolves in my neighborhood. So
I
they
thought
were,
I thought I recognized them
yes, they were intrepid.
and
They
the
were,
dog.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And it worked out that the older wolf, Charlie, in the back, was growing those lamb chop sideburns. So he looked older. And
he was-
Charlie, in the novel, Charlie's in love. So I got to do like teen love. He's 17 and he's fallen in love. And I think the line is like, he's crossed the river. We can watch him from the other side of the river, but love has
right.
struck him down.
Yeah, and that was a really great moment, and so true. And we never even got to the part about their marriage. So there's so much in this book. It's so rich.
Thank you, my
I
friend.
don't know if there are any more questions, but definitely please buy this book and buy it from Belmont Books, because they're a wonderful bookstore and they need our support. But
Yes.
yeah,
And
here comes Olivia.
yeah,
Thank you so much for saying that. I mean, I know that it means the world to us here at Belmont Books just to have these showings of support from people in the chat, and knowing that you guys are all here coming out for us and for these authors, it just means the world, especially when the book is as beautiful as Landslide is. I know personally, I'm very excited to read it, and you can all get your copies. Yes, of this gorgeous book.
Such an awesome book. It really is. Look how beautiful.
well, Maryanne, it's been such a treat. We could talk for hours, but I'm so grateful to you, and I am so excited for Little Matches. So I know that we'll be gathering again to celebrate that beautiful book. There it is. Yeah.
And you can also
Yeah.
pre-order that on belmontbooks.com. It does look like we have a question loading from Jennifer Burton in the chat. But yes,
Oh,
hopefully.
wait. Oh, there's a question coming. We're all on Tinder.
Matches.
I was struck today about how we have been folded into history with the pandemic out of the blue. Now we will be studied like those 100 years ago with the flu. We didn't expect this clearly. The fishing industry has always lived on the chronic worry edge, and now I think we can feel it too. I read a bit about Maryanne's book. Can you two speak a bit about living on that edge and how do you soften that edge? I can just say, really try to live right now. And when my daughter, she lived with a lifelong illness, I had a maxim early on: do not worry, do not ruin tomorrow worrying about today.
There we go.
Do not ruin today worrying about tomorrow. 8 o'clock is my bedtime.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful question and a beautiful place to end. I think that certainly will be Jillian's credo, right? That's her, that's like the whole ethos, I think, of Landslide too. So thank you, Maryanne.
She really comes to a really great self-awareness.
Oh, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Olivia and Kathy and everybody who came. And thank you for buying Susan's wonderful book. Bye.
All right, bye everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your night.
Take care. Bye-bye.